Welcome to Newt's World Podcast on the iHeart Podcast Network. The greatest American inventions. Today's invention is one most Americans use every single day without thinking about it for a second. And it was a gift, a deliberate, expensive, strategic gift from the American government to every person on Earth. GPS. The Global Positioning System is a network of 31 satellites orbiting 12,500 miles above Earth. Each broadcasts a continuous radio signal containing two pieces of information: the satellite's precise location and the precise time. A GPS receiver picks up signals from multiple satellites simultaneously. By measuring the tiny difference in arrival times, it calculates its distance from each satellite. With signals from 4 or more, it pinpoints its location in 3 dimensions: latitude, longitude, altitude, to within a few meters. The timing has to be accurate to billionths of a second. The satellites carry atomic clocks, and GPS receivers must account for effects predicted by Einstein's general relativity. Clocks in orbit tick at a slightly different rate than clocks on the ground. GPS is, among other things, a daily, practical demonstration of Einstein's physics. The system was developed by the Department of Defense beginning in the early 1970s. First satellite launched in 1978. Full constellation operational in 1994. Total development cost, roughly $12 billion. Designed as a military system for precision navigation and weapons guidance. But the decision that matters most in GPS history was made not by an engineer. It was made by a president. On September 1st, 1983, Soviet fighters shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, which had strayed off course. All 269 people aboard were killed, in part because of a navigation error. President Reagan announced that once GPS was complete, it would be made freely available to civilian users worldwide. No charge, no license, no restrictions. The United States had spent billions building a navigation system and was now giving it to the entire world. Civilian applications took off slowly, then explosively. In 2000, President Clinton ordered the military degradation of the civilian signal removed, making civilian GPS as accurate as military. GPS chips rapidly shrank and fell in price. By the mid-2000s, standalone navigation devices sold by the tens of millions. By 2010, GPS chips were standard in smartphones, and navigation apps like Google Maps transformed how people move through the world. But navigation is the most visible application, not the most important one. Financial markets use GPS timing to synchronize transactions. The time stamping of trades requires microsecond accuracy, and GPS provides it. Without GPS timing, the modern financial system would not function. Cell networks use GPS to synchronize their towers. Aviation uses it for approach and landing. Farmers use it to plant with centimeter precision. Search and rescue teams locate people in distress. The National Institute of Standards and Technology estimated GPS contributes more than $1.5 trillion to the U.S. economy alone. Its global contribution is several times that. Its global contribution is several times that. GPS tells us something important about the relationship between government investment and technological progress. GPS could not have been built by the private sector in 1973. The cost was too high, the timeline too long, the payoff too uncertain. Only government could make that investment. Big government alone couldn't have generated the applications, the navigation apps, the agricultural tools, the financial systems that made GPS so valuable. Those required entrepreneurship, competition, and the creative energy of the private market. GPS is a story about the right relationship between government and the market. Government invests in foundational infrastructure. The private sector builds on it. And if the government is wise enough as Reagan's administration was, to make that infrastructure openly available, the results can be extraordinary. $1.5 trillion in economic value from a gift. Next time, we go back to the street, a sidewalk at Midtown Manhattan, where in April 1973, an engineer made a phone call that would eventually connect 8 billion people, the mobile phone. Coming up, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman joins me to talk about America 250, the next era of NASA, and what the future of space travel could look like for the United States and the world. That's next. I have to say I am really pleased to welcome my guest, who I think is a remarkable human being, the perfect person to be leading America into space at this moment. Jared Isaacman was nominated in 2025 to serve as the 15th administrator of NASA. He's the founder of Shift 4, which he started at 16, and later co-founded Draken International, a company that provides advanced training support to U.S. military pilots. He's a highly experienced pilot with more than 8,000 flight hours, has flown in over 100 air shows, and is an honorary fellow of the Society of Experimental Test Pilots. In 2021, he commanded Inspiration4, the first all-civilian mission to orbit, and later led Polaris Dawn, which reached nearly 900 miles above Earth and included the first commercial spacewalk. He's here to talk about NASA's future, America's return to the moon, and how the next era of space exploration, from the Artemis program to Mars and beyond, is taking shape. And he's a remarkable human being and somebody who I'm really privileged to think of as a friend. Jared, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Sir, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you today, and I can't think of a greater champion for America's space program than yourself. Every bit of the words you have written, the speeches you have said, have helped put America in a position where we are right now for continued leadership in space and this exciting future that we are building.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say, I sort of lived with you during the entire flight of Artemis II. I remember talking to you right after it took off, and you said, well, number of days ahead of just paying attention. But it does feel like NASA has re-entered deep space exploration and is really looking beyond that. So from your perspective, how does Artemis II reshape NASA's long-term vision?
It's a great question, sir. And I have to say that we do have a lot of the ingredients necessary for this effort to return astronauts to the moon under the Artemis program, to build the moon base and do the other things. And that comes from President Trump. My first day on the job, when I was sworn in, he signed a national space policy that called for American leadership in space to pick up where Apollo 17 left off, return to the moon, build a moon base, establish that enduring presence to prepare for where we go next, which is Mars, and make investments in nuclear power and propulsion. So just saying, between the president's mandate and the $10 billion plus up I received from Congress from the Working Family Tax Cut Act, we have the tools now at NASA to get out and create those world-changing headlines that we were known for in decades past. Now, the Artemis program, which was created and established under President Trump's first term, is that great effort to return astronauts to the moon. Artemis II, what an opening act. 4 amazing individuals that flew around the moon, brought all of us along with them. We brought them home safely, and now we announced Artemis III. That will be very Apollo 9-esque. We're going to launch those astronauts into Earth orbit. We're going to rendezvous and test with 2 different landers, a SpaceX lander and a Blue Origin lander. I mean, this is going to be an unbelievable show. You're going to see 3 of the most powerful rockets in the world all ignite in a short span of time, converge in Earth orbit, and gather the data necessary for where we go next, which is going to be Artemis IV in 2028, where we finally return American astronauts to the surface of the moon.
You're combining a sense of urgency with a very disciplined, prudent kind of approach to management risk. And of course, we saw recently with Blue Origin having their major rocket blow up on the test bed. This is a challenging, difficult process. I remember you said at the time that this is a reminder of just how hard space is. You're, after all, somebody who twice jumped on top of a rocket and went into orbit. So you've personally experienced this. Would you talk to us a minute about the complexity of the engineering? Everything has to work simultaneously or it fails. How do you deal with that requirement for 100% validity every time?
Well, I'll tell you, sir, it comes from actually that event that you witnessed, which is testing. You know, there were no crew on that vehicle. We had a whole blast danger area cleared out, so no lives were ever at risk. It certainly was quite an explosion. But for those that ask the question, I remind them, go back to YouTube and search NASA explosions from the late 1950s and early 1960s. That is how we tested and learned at that time period. Now, it's certainly a different time today, but we're doing things a lot differently. The Blue Origin rocket is designed for reusability. Launch into space, come back and land on a barge, and then reuse it again. And that is imperative because we are not going to realize the future that I know you want to see, sir, that I want to see, and all the children around the world want to see, if we're throwing away the rocket every time we launch. So yes, there will be setbacks. You're talking about a controlled explosion to accelerate mass to 17,500 miles an hour if you want to put it in Earth orbit, 25,000 miles an hour if you want to send it to the moon or Mars. That is extremely challenging, especially when you want to do it in a reusable, affordable, efficient way. There will be setbacks. What we learn from it, we roll into the subsequent hardware. That's what NASA is helping Blue Origin with today. Let's learn what went wrong, rebuild the pad, roll the improvements into the next rocket, and get back into the business of sending rockets to the moon.
You've already announced the Artemis III crew, which could launch as soon as 2027. And that includes a first-time flyer, Andre Douglas, veteran astronauts Frank Rubio and Randy Bresnik, along with European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano. From your standpoint, what makes this particular crew and mission so important?
I think that it was actually said best by the Artemis II crew when they passed the baton, the torch, to the Artemis III crew at Johnson Space Center and said that Artemis III is the link from Artemis II to the Artemis IV crew that will walk on the moon. It is an extremely challenging endeavor. It's a multi-launch campaign. Again, you're talking about 3 of the most powerful rockets in the world will all launch in relatively quick succession and converge their hardware into Earth orbit. We've never done anything like that before, but it's extremely important to do so because when we think about what the next 50 years of American exploration in space and space leadership looks like, it's not putting everything you need on a single rocket like we did with the Saturn V during the Apollo era. You're talking about thriving spaceports across the nation, launching lots of rockets, and then the hardware coming together in Earth orbit, on-orbit assembly, whether that's data centers or spaceships that are going to take astronauts to Mars someday or even beyond. So getting good at a multi-launch campaign is imperative for America's future in space. You're going to have a lot of test pilots on the Artemis III crew, a lot of test pilot background. Plus, Andre Douglas, he was the backup crew for Artemis II, so he spent 3.5 years getting very good at the Orion spacecraft. You're going to bring all of that expertise together on this mission, test out the interoperability of those landers, which you'd rather do in Earth orbit when you're hours away from coming home if something goes wrong than doing it for the first time on the moon. That's why we had Apollo 9 in the 1960s. That's why we have Artemis 3 today. It's imperative to set up for success in 2028 when Artemis 4 lands on the moon.
How important in the development of our whole approach to space is the development of reusable rockets?
It's everything, sir. I mean, it is absolutely everything. I mean, you know, what do you hear all the time when people ask about space? It's hard and it's expensive. Okay, so yes, space is hard. We will continue to get better at it, just as we have over the decades, but we must bring down the cost, sir. I mean, if you think about it, you go back to the 1980s, who had cell phones? Well, they were so big, they were built into cars. Right? It was wealthy Wall Street traders that could afford it. You fast forward today, well, every 12-year-old in the world's got a phone with a camera on it and connectivity, which, by the way, connectivity solves a lot of the world's problems. And some of the most important technological companies in the nation, they don't build the phones, they don't build the cell towers, they make the software that runs on the phone that delivers you food at 2 a.m. in the morning. I mean, this is a future orbital economy, and you can't do that if the cost to put mass in orbit is so expensive. So rapid reusability brings down down the cost to orbit. That means we can launch more missions for establishing an on-orbit economy. Perhaps that's data centers or AI. It means you can launch more missions like Hubble and James Webb Telescope, more rovers on Mars someday because it's more affordable to do so. It means you can build commercial space stations. You can build outposts on the moon. You can build outposts on Mars. Reusability is everything to bring down the cost for the future we all want to see in space someday.
Now, you're doing something that, as I understand it, is significantly different in that the work you're going to do on lunar landers, you're having SpaceX and Blue Origin do them rather than trying to do them in-house. Why did NASA choose that kind of a model where you're beginning to have pretty big companies who are going to take responsibility for doing this? What's the advantage from America's standpoint to doing it this way?
Well, this is a good question. And I think people often forget, too, in the 1960s, when NASA set out and achieved the near impossible on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon, we didn't do it alone. You had Boeing, you had McDonnell Douglas. Grumman built the lunar lander that took the astronauts to the surface. Now, many of those companies still help NASA today, and then there's new companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Rocket Lab and others. And I acknowledge they bring a different kind of flair to this, right? And it often asks people about, why do you even need NASA when you have companies like that? And it's like, no, we do this together. We had a lot of success with the commercial cargo resupply program that SpaceX and Northrop Grumman have done a good job at. We've had a lot of success with commercial crew where SpaceX and their Dragon have brought astronauts continuously to and from the International Space Station. And we can do the same, leveraging their great capabilities for building out our moon base and returning astronauts to the surface of the moon. Now, I think it's great to have a competition between SpaceX and Blue Origin. They're both highly resourced. They're investing in their capabilities well in excess of taxpayer dollars, which is a good thing. That's how we can do the near impossible with 0.25% of the discretionary budget instead of, 4.5% like it was in the 1960s. And it's delivering a capability that's great for the nation and honestly, humankind. And when you do have industry that can do this for NASA and our space agency more affordably, it allows us to free up resources to focus once again on the near impossible objective, which is, and this was in President Trump's national space policy, building the nuclear power and propulsion spacecraft that can take NASA astronauts to Mars and beyond. That is something that there is not an obvious business case for. I do not expect industry to start making nuclear reactors as a service in space. Let NASA focus on those hard problems and hand off other needs to industry that are capable of delivering, like our lunar landers.
Part of what you're doing here, I think that to me, as sort of a space nut, is really exciting. You're not talking about visiting the moon. You're talking about going to the moon to stay. Expand on that whole notion of a moon base rather than just a brief visit.
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of that credit goes to President Trump. I spoke to him many times about America's return to the moon, and he often asked, didn't we do that during the Apollo era? And it was like, absolutely, sir, we did, but we haven't been back in more than a half century. Let's undertake what is probably going to be the most daring real estate endeavor in human history and build out an enduring presence on the moon, build the moon base. And he put that in his national space policy, and NASA has responded to it with our ignition event. So we are going back to the moon to establish the enduring presence. We are not going to build this beautiful glass dome with a Ferris wheel and a crop farm in it right out of the gate. We're going to do lots of landers, lots of rovers. We are going to learn what does and doesn't work in the extremely harsh environment on the lunar South Pole. And we're doing it for a lot of good reasons. We're doing for scientific potential. There's going to be rovers with radio telescopes driving to the far side of the moon to unlock the secrets of the universe. There is economic potential. We could have a lunar economy someday. We are certainly doing it to inspire the next generation of explorers to grow up and contribute. But number one, sir, we are going to have NASA astronauts interacting with the water ice on the South Pole of the moon to master the skills that will be necessary when we send astronauts to Mars and be able to bring them home safely. The only place that makes sense to have that kind of proving ground is a moon base on the South Pole of the moon.
When you describe all this, you've already had an amazing personal life in that twice you've been an astronaut, and I think you were the first civilian to do a spacewalk. When you look beyond your job as administrator, could you imagine sometime in the next 10 or 12 years visiting the moon base?
Well, I certainly hope it's a possibility for many people to go and visit a moon base. You know, one of the key performance indicators I think about at NASA is how many people are living and working in space. And right now, it's not a very big number, and I hope we see it measured in hundreds and thousands in the future. And not only that, I'll tell you another key performance indicator that I think matters a lot is how many kids are dressing up as astronauts for Halloween. And I'll tell you, after the Artemis II mission, I think there's going to be an awful lot more doing so. But I feel very grateful to serve as NASA Administrator. I think everyone who's called to the journey of traveling into space wants to do so because they want to be part of something far bigger than themselves. And when you're in space, you certainly have a perspective of scale about how big everything is around you and what your contributions are to it. I can't imagine a better place to contribute to America and really humankind's future in space than where I'm at right now at NASA alongside the best and brightest.
When we come back, we're going to explore what it's going to take to build a lasting presence beyond the moon and how power and global competition will shape that race. What do you see as sort of the race with both the moon and Mars and with developments around low Earth orbit with the emergence of an effective Chinese system?
There is no doubt, sir, that we have a competitor that is very capable, that is moving very quickly in the high ground of space and not always through the peaceful lens of exploration. Now, I do think competitions are a good thing. It certainly worked out very well for NASA and America during the 1960s when we were competing against the Soviet Union, and I have no doubt it will work out again. But I have to say, I don't know if I would be as effective with some of the reforms that we are implementing at NASA and the ability to concentrate our resources on these imperative needle-moving objectives if we didn't have competition. I think the status quo probably would have continued. So in that respect, I'm actually very grateful that we are competing on the world stage right now. NASA is responding incredibly well. We have amazing support from the administration, bipartisan support from Congress. And I think with all the tools and resources made available to us, we will succeed in returning astronauts to the surface of the moon. But the consequences are real, sir. The lunar South Pole, you know, when you think about the moon, big moon, surface area of Africa, the South Pole that we're targeting, I mean, that's a little bit bigger, the area we want to be, than Washington, D.C. And not all of the land is suitable. You know, depending on the crater ridge locations, you may or may not have access to power. You may or may not have access to the water ice, which is so important for future missions to Mars. So we are back in a race. We're getting in a rhythm here, and we can't just stop at the moon. We, in parallel, need to make investments for the next giant leap capabilities, which is nuclear power and propulsion, which is SR-1 Freedom that will launch in the end of 2028, the first nuclear-powered interplanetary spacecraft, so we can set our sights even beyond the moon to Mars.
Now, one of the things that made me most encouraged about the president's decision to ask you to be the administrator is that not only had you personally gone into space and proven how committed you are, but you really get the importance of nuclear power, both on the moon itself, but even more important in developing a nuclear engine that will dramatically change the length of time and the ability to go throughout the solar system. Can you talk first about the impact of nuclear power on the moon's surface and why it's important, and then why a nuclear engine is so central to really reaching beyond the moon?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think it's imperative for NASA to constantly be recalibrating back to the near impossible. I do not think it's a good thing for NASA to be doing what industry is capable of doing. Because as we've seen from recent headlines, you know, some of the commercial space companies, they have equity appreciation that is not something any government, you know, agency is going to be able to compete with. What we need to do is what no other company, government organization, or even country is capable of doing. And when we crack the code on that, we hand it off to industry and let competitive dynamics drive down costs and make the capability better, like we've seen in launch, like we've seen in observation. And then once again, NASA should recalibrate back to the near impossible. I think that's nuclear power and propulsion. Now, with respect to the moon base, we're targeting the South Pole of the moon. We want to work with the water ice that's there to master the skills to go to Mars. Now, that's in a permanently shaded region. So if you want to have continuous power and heating in that really harsh environment, you're going to want to leverage the power density available from fission reactions. So putting a nuclear power plant on the South Pole of the moon is going to power our moon base. Now, it's great when you can take advantage of the fusion reactor that is our star, which is very good for Earth orbit. It's very good for the moon. It's even very good for in the vicinity of Mars. But once you start getting to the surface and there is dust that could be blocking solar panels, or you get beyond Jupiter, the effectiveness of our star drops materially, in which case, again, you're going to want to unlock the power density available in a fission reaction. So when we start thinking about exploring the outer solar systems, or perhaps someday journeying to a star system other than our own, we can no longer rely on solar power, and we're going to have to start making those investments today in what next generation propulsion looks like.
If you were talking to, as I'm sure you do, say classes of people who are 15, 16, 17 years old, what can they look forward to literally in their lifetime as the potential of developing space?
Oh, what an exciting time. And I do, sir. I talk to them all the time. Like, you are growing up in the most exciting time for human space exploration since the Apollo era. I mean, we're returning to the moon. We're doing so with frequency. We're building a moon base. We are never going to give up the moon again. And that opens up professions beyond what we historically think about when it comes to astronauts and engineers. I mean, now we're talking about long-term habitability on another planet right now. I mean, a lot of the same skills that you would assemble, for example, for a scientific outpost on Antarctica, you're going to want on a moon base someday. We're building nuclear power and propulsion spaceships. The kids in school today are growing up at a time period where there will be astronauts on Mars. There will be a Martian outpost, and the technology is going to be available to us when you think about how AI can be involved in the process, additive manufacturing, next generation propulsion, for us to truly go out, explore the outer solar system, and potentially answer the questions that people have been thinking about since really the beginning of human history. There is no greater time to be growing up and contributing to the greatest adventure ever.
You and I are both very excited about the moon and beyond. But the other thing, which is sort of amazing, I don't understand it, frankly, is the scale of the satellite systems. You look at Starlink and Project Kuiper and China's Guowang. We're talking about putting up tens of thousands of satellites. At what point does this managing the traffic flow become a major challenge?
Well, it's a great question. And yes, it's extremely exciting to think about. I mean, these constellations that are going up are connecting disconnected people from all across the world, which again, I think is foundational to solving, many of the world's problems, not just from connectivity. You've got observation capabilities, and observation coupled with AI. So as these satellites are looking down on Earth, can help us better predict natural disasters that are costly, that take human lives and suffering. So, I mean, this is a capability that is really, it's probably a signature example now of an affordable capability in space that makes life better across Earth. Now, to your question, is this become a problem when we have thousands, tens of thousands of satellites? Well, I'd say space is really big, very big. Now, a lot of times you want to be very close to Earth for latency reasons, but there's plenty of examples where you'd maybe put satellites into geostationary orbit or cislunar, kind of make available all the space that is around us, use optical comms, so lasers, to transmit data. This is exciting because this is the space economy we've all been waiting for, because we know we're not going to have the future we envisioned as children in space if it's perpetually funded by taxpayers. There has to be an orbital economy. There has to be a lunar economy to fund it. I think these constellations that are being built out by some of the most technologically advanced companies in the world is a great thing.
Do you think we will presently have sort of an industry of orbital cleanup that somehow goes and gathers up various pieces of debris?
I have some doubts on that, sir, and that just based on, I'm pretty familiar with the problem, because the number one risk for my missions in space was micrometeoroids, orbital debris. It was the number one risk on actually Artemis II. You start getting into some really high probabilities of catastrophic failure based on very small, we're talking millimeter balls of like aluminum or specks of paint traveling at orbital velocities, connecting with another object traveling at orbital velocities. The amount of energy released there is, again, can be quite catastrophic. And I just don't think there's any practical way to go and identify and track millimeter-sized objects and maybe hit it with directed energy and reduce the size. It's a problem that I think is rather impractical. Now, in my mind, the solution is don't add to the problem. Like, we have to look at the satellites we build and do everything we can to ensure that when they degrade, they do so gracefully in Earth's atmosphere and burn up and don't create a debris problem. So there's kind of a design and certification standard, I think, necessary for satellites. The ability to deconflict. So when an object is detected, they can move away from it and not impact it, because that's really problematic. And then we also have to do everything we can to avoid a kinetic conflict in space in the future. If there's a shooting war in space, you have the ability to really degrade the world's capability to access low Earth orbit. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that's crossing a line similar to maybe targeting a nuclear reactor. You know, we don't do that in conflict because we know it could be catastrophic for the environment around it for 100,000 years. We want to do everything we can to avoid adding to the debris problem in space. I'd say the United States is extremely responsible in that regard. Our industry is responsible in that regard. Some of our adversaries, based on their recent anti-satellite tests, may not be quite as responsible.
Coming up, how we're going to work together with private companies and NASA to really develop the evolution of commercial space and commercial competition. How would you describe how you see the evolution of commercial space over the next 10 or 20 years?
That's an excellent question, and something we're trying to be very active with today, which is steering industry and actually, honestly, steering private capital and the venture capital community as to where we see a need at NASA, where we think there is the highest potential opportunity for a commercial market. So when we talk about a commercial market, what you want for it to be very successful is for NASA to be one customer of many. Great example of that in launch, right? I mean, right now, NASA is a customer, the Department of War is a customer, the intelligence community is a customer, commercial industry is a customer for communication satellites, not to mention all of our international allies. Launch is a success story for commercial industry where there's a big market, lots of demand, and competitive forces have made the capability better. Self-landing rockets that land on ships and back on land, and have reduced costs materially. Another example is observation and communication. NASA and the United States government does not have to build multi-billion-dollar bespoke communication relay satellites and put them into orbit anymore. Industry is doing that. And who's customers? Everybody is practically a customer when you think of Starlink or what Blue Origin or Amazon is working on. That is a great thing. Where you want to be careful is not everything necessarily has a commercial solution to it. For example, if we want to put a nuclear power plant on the moon, we need one. And it's going to be really hard because no one's ever done anything like that, right? You may not have an example for decades into the future if NASA will be one customer of many. So if you jump right to a commercial solution there before it's proven, you probably have the makings of an inspector general's report because it's going to be behind schedule, over budget. And NASA, if they are the only customer, well, you're essentially just financing them, paying for it as a service. They're going to recoup their capital costs and they're going to want to profit for it. But if you can get it right, like we sent a huge demand signal for landers and rovers for the moon, enough that can last, who knows, a decade as we build out the moon base. You're giving industry every opportunity to template their product, scale up production until such time as there are multiple other customers buying those landers and rovers. And that's how you ignite the economy properly. So I think it's about doing it in a thoughtful way. We got great success stories of it already with launch observation and communication. We'll have more of it, no doubt, in Earth orbit and on the moon.
I have to ask you, having gone into space like this, and as you point out, it is dangerous. On the other hand, it is astonishing. Would you recommend it to people?
Oh, of course. Now, I also climb mountains and skydive, and I do a lot of things that I could recommend to people, and I don't know how many will absolutely sign up for it, but I want to see a world in the future where my daughters can go and travel into space, can visit the moon. I think it's our destiny. I think humankind's destiny is to go out and explore across the solar system to other star systems and answer those questions, unlock the secrets of the universe. And I think as costs materially come down, now Starship will be the first rocket that both the booster and the upper stage is fully reusable. It's a lot of volume, a lot of mass that can go into orbit and do so affordably. That's going to help. And we're going to see from a dozen or so people in space at one time to potentially hundreds, maybe even thousands. But I think the real key is something that necessitates people in space beyond the experience, and that's working in space. That's an orbital economy, and that's a lunar economy. And when we figure that out, that's going to change everything.
There are going to be people out there with adequate resources. They're real builders in terms of what's going to happen in space. I mean, I think SpaceX itself has been one of the great breakthroughs in our ability to get into space. Do you expect to see more companies emerge contributing to lower cost, more reliable space activities?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's foundational for any business is how do you get more value out of whatever the product or service is than you put into it. And launch, again, great examples of it. And I have no doubt competitive dynamics will continue to drive innovation and bring down costs. Again, observation, communication, data centers, I'm pretty excited about that. I think that's not going to be day one profitable endeavor. It's going to take time for the technology to mature and for the unit economics to play out. But I have no doubt data centers and AI in space will be a viable market. It comes down to that. I hope we find the cancer-curing drug that requires microgravity or 3D printing everyone a spare liver in space. I know that would go over very well in the DC area. We need to figure out whatever that is. It's mining helium-3 on the lunar surface. We need to figure out what we can get more value out of than what we put into it that requires microgravity or being on the lunar surface with lunar regolith. And that's how you ignite an orbital or space economy. And that's how more companies are going to pour into solving some of those problems.
As we celebrate our 250th anniversary of signing the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson wrote on a number of occasions that we were an empire of liberty, and that he saw us gradually, the notion that our rights come from our Creator, as gradually becoming a universalism. In that sense, it seems to me you have a unique role because you have been assigned by President Trump to carry freedom to the moon and to Mars and beyond. Do you have in yourself some sense of what a patriotic, historic opportunity you've been given?
I'm grateful for every day that I wake up and get to come to work at NASA and contribute to what I think is the greatest adventure in human history. So there's no doubt this is a role and this is an agency that is really at the spearhead of patriotism when it comes to the peaceful exploration of the last great frontier. I think it's an immense responsibility. I think it has national security implications. Really, it's a key to a future that we all want to see come be realized from all of its scientific potential of the telescopes we will launch, the rovers, the probes that will go and unlock the secrets of the universe, the economic potential it will have, and the inspiration for those that follow that will do it even better than us. So I certainly understand the weight of the responsibility here. I've been a student of all the history that NASA has made in decades past, and I'm very confident in all the history we will make in the decades forward.
How will you be spending the 4th of July, America's birthday this year?
So I plan to be flying in an F-5 fighter jet painted in Freedom 250 colors, along with 4 other fighter jets that will be representing NASA flying over the nation's capital.
That's great. I want to thank you both for joining me, but also for being such a patriot, for being willing to endure what it took to get to where you are now, for the courage you're showing and the determination you're showing. I think you are going to change history, and it's a great honor to have you on my podcast.
Well, the honor is mine, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much, and thanks for all you've done and will continue to do for America's space program.
Thank you to my guest, Jared Isaacman. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Join me on Substack at Gingrich360.net. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.